Good morning. I'm Andrew Lansley. I'm Strategic Counsel at Low Associates, who have the pleasure and privilege of working with our colleagues at DG REGIO on the Border Focal Point Network, a great network for bringing together people who work across borders within the European Union. We know that cross-border regions are capable not only of addressing their shared problems, but actually acting as a living laboratory for European integration. And indeed, there is some of the greatest potential for enhancements in growth, employment and opportunity in Europe are in the border regions. We have had a range of fascinating discussions in the preceding 24 Borders Breakfast debates. This is the 25th, and it brings us to the very interesting and important issue of housing in border regions. Well, we know that housing is an important issue all across Europe, but it comes with particular complexities in border regions. So in today's Borders Breakfast debate, we look to identify those challenges, seek out the opportunities for how border regions can meet those challenges and exploit those opportunities. We're delighted to have a fascinating set of contributors to our discussion this morning. You, our participants, will be joining in. I will be asking you on 2 occasions to express your own views about housing in border regions. All through the discussion, please do take advantage of the chat function to share with colleagues, particularly if you make references to a report or research. It's always very helpful for that to be, the link to that to be put into the chat. And also, after we've heard from our contributors, there will be an opportunity for questions and discussion towards the latter stages. So do please, if you have questions that you wish to put or points you wish to have made, do put those up in the chat as well, and I will look out and try to incorporate those into our discussions. So no better place to start than with Simona Pohlová, who is the acting head of the unit at the Interreg unit, dealing with cross-border cooperation at DG REGIO. I wonder, Simona, would you be very kind and open our discussions today by sharing your perspectives about housing in border regions? Please, Simona.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Thank you.
Perfect. And good morning from DG Region and Urban Policy to all of you, dear colleagues, experts and panelists. Welcome to this 25th edition of the Beyond Breakfast debate. I'm very happy to address you on such an interesting and relevant topic, such as housing in border regions, which actually interlinks different policy areas. Housing, as you know, is a topic very high on the European agenda. It was also mentioned during the State of the Union address by our President, Ursula von der Leyen. In border regions, given their specific context, housing is a very pertinent issue. We meet today to explore and learn about the various challenges and opportunities related to housing in border regions. We will definitely today go beyond bricks and mortar and explore housing through broader lenses, touching upon spatial planning, sustainability, energy, social matters such as inclusiveness, integration, affordability, and community. All of that plays an important role in the way in which we conceive, structure, and perceive housing, and where cooperation also can play a positive role. Border regions represent a unique tapestry woven with the complexities of geographical, socio-economic, and regulatory dimensions. In these regions, workers often reside on one side of the border and commute daily to the neighboring country or region to work, for instance, and that creates pressure on the housing supply. There are income gaps and uneven purchasing power across borders, and those are drivers of cross-border commuting and speculative demand for housing. On top of that, borders often separate distinct planning systems and fiscal regimes. There is a lack of coordination that leads to unbalanced development and limited housing supply, where demand is growing fastest. Cross-border price gaps risk excluding local residents from their own housing markets, especially in areas with integrated labour markets. The solutions lie not within isolated efforts, but through collaborative cross-border approaches. While Interreg does not normally invest in housing construction, as you know, it encourages, for example, collaborative planning across borders. Coordinating spatial planning and joint data monitoring can mitigate the housing pressures. Through our pilot action, Resilient Borders, we are looking into cross-border spatial planning in 10 different cross-border areas in our internal borders. And through Interreg-specific Objective 1 on better cooperation governance, we aim to solidify cross-border governance structures and methods. Indeed, where such a cross-border governance already exists, for example, in the Basque Eurocity or Greater Geneva, housing outcomes are much more balanced. Finally, I would like to emphasize the relevance of the new European Bauhaus initiative and its values and principles. They foster sustainability, inclusiveness, and quality of experience for communities, as well as participatory approaches to designing and using the environment among which building space, about which public spaces and housing. Embracing the new European Bauhaus principles and values allows us to co-create vibrant, culturally rich, community-oriented and nature-friendly environments across borders. Thank you very much for the moment, and I'm looking forward to an interesting debate. Andrew, over to
Simona,
you.
thank you very much indeed for setting the scene, and I'm fascinated to learn that you're engaging with how the spatial planning programme works in a number of cross-border regions. I think that will be, I'm sure you'll bring back to the Border Focal Point Network some of the conclusions from that very interesting work. Can I ask our participants now to express their views? So it's like a poll, but we're not giving you any of the answers, I'm afraid, to choose from. You're going to have to come forward with your own view about what are the biggest challenges in housing in border regions. Now, there are, I think Simona has given us the overview, and there are a wide range of possibilities, and I won't, as they say, attempt to lead the witnesses, but do please put onto the poll the challenges that you see. I think is it necessary to register with a Slido at all, or can one simply put them up on the chat function? Anybody can see? Yes, so there's a live poll on the chat function, and I think you can put your answer into that on the chat function. And in a few moments, after we've had the opportunity to hear from Dr. Gorczynska-Angiulli, we will be taking your view of what are the biggest challenges for housing in border regions. So put them up on that poll in the chat, please. Let us turn, if I may, please, to Magdalena. If I may call you Magdalena, I presume in that way. Dr. Gorczynska-Angiulli is from the Luxembourg Institute of Socio-Economic Research. I wonder if you could tell us something of your research, particularly on cross-border housing dynamics. Can you share your perspective on mobility, spatial planning, and how national differences have helped to shape cross-border region housing markets, please? Magdalena.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Andrew, for this introduction, and thank you for invitation for this morning debate. So I think that to kick off the discussion on cross-border housing dynamics, we have to build a kind of context, and we have to look on the population and cross-border workers dynamic, because these are two elements that are strongly impacting the housing needs and also the cross-border housing dynamics. Today I would like to take an example of the greater region and in particular the functional area of Luxembourg. This is my case study area to give you some insights what is happening with respect to this cross-border housing dynamics. Luxembourg is a very small country, like we have a little bit less than 700,000 inhabitants, but the number of population is steadily growing over the past years, and we are expecting to have an increase of around 30% of people by 2050. This increase of population, however, is also coupled with the fact that the prices on the housing market in Luxembourg are also growing despite a small decrease over the past few years. And many residents, many people working in Luxembourg cannot afford also staying and living in the country. So they are crossing the border and looking for the accommodation in neighboring regions, Lorraine in France, Saarland or Rheinland-Pfalz in Germany, or in Wallonia in Belgium, which of course have important impacts on these neighboring countries in different ways. But before we move to what is happening in the neighboring countries, few additional information about the Luxembourg. So we have this huge increase in the population, but the construction of new dwellings is not keeping the pace. So we are estimating that we are missing roughly 20,000 dwellings to address the needs of the population. So we should construct more. We are building around 3,000-4,000 of dwellings every year, which is not enough. But I would say the construction sector is a little bit saturated. So the public and social developers are doing their best, but they cannot build more than they are doing right now. And then in terms of private developers that are dominating the market, of course, they are following their business strategies and they are building according to their own rhythm. So apart from these problems to keep pace on the construction, of course, we have to also bear in mind the recommendations linked to the no net land take. This is the one of the new ideas that are promoted by the European Commission, but also each country is trying to follow these recommendations, which basically indicate that we should reduce the land conversion for development purposes. So we should densify where it's possible. We should use the already built up areas to provide new housing, for example. But of course, this means a lot for Luxembourg and for neighboring regions, because first we have troubles to build, and then we should build only in specific areas where the further development is of dwellings is recommended. So we cannot build everywhere, but in specific areas. The same applies to the neighboring regions, which also causes certain tensions and difficulties. This is also linked to the fact that we are putting also in the spotlight the post-industrial areas that are quite numerous in our region, where the construction of new dwellings should take place, both on Luxembourg territory and in the neighboring regions. Our colleagues from neighboring regions, for example, from North Lorraine in France, are also pointing to the fact that the number of cross-border workers that are settling down in their area is growing very strongly, which means also for them the growing demand for housing in the coming years. But growing demand for housing means also growing demand for our public services and public infrastructures. And this is also something that we have to bear in mind, that they are accommodating more and more people that are commuting every day to work in Luxembourg. Another important fact, around 47% of employees in Luxembourg today are cross-border workers. So we can also see that the labor market in Luxembourg is, I would say, strongly dependent to cross-border workers. And this also shows us that we need to find a way to collaborate better to solve the housing shortages and to find the common solutions and strategies how to address all these housing needs. Of course, there are also the impacts of high house prices in Luxembourg on neighboring regions. We are now collecting the data related to advertised house prices in the neighboring regions. The gap between Luxembourg and border regions is enormous. Roughly 3 times the prices in Luxembourg are 3 times higher than in neighboring countries. So this might be also an incentive for some people to move across the border and to commute, because you can become homeowner at much lower costs. But then you pay much higher costs due to increased commuting time. Also, different studies are showing that people living in Luxembourg are in average spending 1 hour per day on commuting to work, while for cross-border workers it's roughly 2 hours, and this is an average. So if you look at individual cases, the statistics are even worse. I think that there are really many different layers that have to be taken into consideration when we are talking about cross-border housing dynamics, and without kind of common collaboration and collaborative strategies, we will not be able to address these challenges. And Luxembourg also cannot forget about cross-border workers and the fact that the economy is so strongly, and the labor market is so strongly dependent to cross-border workers on the one hand. On the other hand, these delays in addressing the housing needs for the residents is also an important aspect, and we should find a way to also build a kind of common strategies and also projections that are going beyond the border. So up to now, one of the difficulties is also that each country or each region is preparing its own statistics at its national or regional level, and sometimes the interrelations with the neighboring countries are not taken into account, which is a huge problem. And I hope that different Interreg projects that are ongoing or that will be launched soon will also have an impact on more collaborative approaches, not only to planning but also to building housing strategies.
Magdalena, thank you very much. Can I just, if I may, just ask 1 or 2 questions, which I think are very much prompted by the interesting things you had to say there. The spatial planning, I mean, for Luxembourg, you were describing Saarland, Lorraine, Wallonia. So far as the spatial planning is concerned, the framework for that is cross-border, number of administrations. Do the administrations create a shared evidence base on which they can do their own or conduct their spatial planning? So do they understand, for example, have a shared understanding of where people are working, where people are living, what are the underlying statistics and data that spatial planning can be drawn from?
Indeed, a few years ago, the new strategy for spatial planning that was adopted in Luxembourg looked at these cross-border relations. And as far as I know, there is a growing interest in, and there are special committees related to spatial planning, which include partners from stakeholders from neighboring regions. So in terms of spatial planning, the first steps were done, and now is a matter of course, we cannot change reality in few days or few years, but I think this is a very promising path that Luxembourg took. But the spatial planning is not the only domain that where this collaboration is needed, and also specifically housing and housing strategies. These also requires the coordination and this kind of alignment between different parties, because we are interconnected. The borders are really like.
Well, I mean, absolutely, you're right. And we've had in the breakfast debates, we've had some fascinating and really constructive discussions about transport, and labour mobility, of course, is one of those key issues. And indeed, infrastructure issues on things like water and power and the availability of water and power, which all go to help to form part of that overall structure of spatial planning. Can I just ask you another thing? Because you've been talking about the high prices that are experienced for housing in Luxembourg. What does that mean in terms of the tenures that are sought? So, for example, if one is looking for social rented housing or privately rented housing in Luxembourg, is that very scarce? Is there a difficulty because of the relative price of housing and securing social housing in Luxembourg?
So this is a very complex subject in Luxembourg. So first of all, we have a very low share of affordable rental dwellings. It's roughly 2%, which is very low compared to other European countries. So the public and social developers are trying to increase this number of affordable rentals by construction, but also there are some new initiatives introduced by the Minister of Housing and Spatial Planning in Luxembourg. So the state is buying also dwellings from private developers to rent out at lower rent. So to increase quicker the number of units that we need to address the needs of the population with the lowest incomes. In terms of general housing tenure structure, so we have around 65% of homeowners, and in the recent years this share dropped slightly according to Eurostat statistics. Still, the number of dwellings rented at the private market are relatively high, so it's remaining 30-something percent. And these dwellings are mainly located in the cities, mainly in the capital city of Luxembourg. The problem is that in the recent years, the rents in the privately rented sector became practically unaffordable. If you look at again the statistics from Eurostat, from EU Silk. In average, the tenants in the private sector are spending 39% of their disposable income to cover the housing costs. So this became really too much. And if you look also at the 20% of tenants with the lowest incomes, they are spending roughly 50% of their disposable income on housing. So it became very difficult to rent a dwelling on the private market. The offer also is not sufficient, so the landlords can select the tenants. So this is very convenient for them. But if you cannot find a dwelling, yes, then you are pushed outside the border. Then there is also the issue of refugees who are obliged to stay in Luxembourg, but they cannot find a dwelling on the private market, and they are really in trouble. So they stay in emergency housing. They are totally also like blocked by the system. So.
Thank you, Magdalena. Thank you very much. Do stay with us, because we hope to have a discussion and take some questions from our participants later on. But thank you very much for all of that interesting explanation of the cross-border issues in housing for Luxembourg. If I may now turn back to the original first poll, asking our participants to tell us about what they regard as the biggest challenges in housing. Housing is there, we can see. Let's look at this word cloud. Affordability of housing, availability of housing, housing prices, costs, markets, prices in comparison. So what we've got here, actually, very many people talking about the particular issues associated with house prices, the costs of housing, and the affordability of housing. So just as we were discussing with Magdalena there, in Luxembourg, clearly a very pronounced issue of the affordability of housing. So I think the challenge that comes out strongest from that, there was references to building regulations, there was references to the impact of tourism and so on. But what comes firmly to the forefront is the question of housing prices and consequently housing costs and affordability for potential occupiers. So let me launch the second poll then. The participants are not going to be able to relax. You've got a further important task, which is to respond to a second question, which I'm hoping will be now brought up for us. The second poll is, what would improve housing in border regions? What would improve housing in border regions? And we're offering a range of possibilities here. A, sharing good practice in affordable and social housing. B, harmonizing taxation and property regulations across borders. C, coordinating spatial planning and urban development policies. D, improving public transport and cross-border mobility. E, creating shared data platforms to monitor housing markets. Or you can choose another solution to the question, what would improve housing in border regions? So do please submit your votes on that, and I will bring to you the subsequent results of that poll after we have had the very great pleasure of listening to Stefan Moser, who is himself from DG ENER, so the Energy Directorate General, but also a member of the European Commission Housing Taskforce. So I'm hoping, Stefan, that you are with us. Yes, you are with us. Thank you very much. May I give you the floor, please, to tell us something about your work on the Taskforce on Housing, and what are your goals, and what, if I may be so bold, what are you hoping that might be achieved through the work of the Taskforce?
Thank you very much. Good morning, Andrew. Thanks a lot also Simona and Magdalena for the very interesting thoughts which you shared already. I think the Housing Task Force is there to really support the Commission's efforts towards member states, but also from the EU level more broadly, working closely together with the European Parliament and the Council to support member states in trying to address the various pressure points which exist. Supply side, demand side, social policies, vulnerable citizens support, but also finance, and then how we can actually share good practices across borders, but also within member states, because there are also internal borders in member states, both different levels of government within the same level of government, but also the different regions and cities, which are basically not always coordinating and working together as well and as smoothly as they should. Here you talk about borders between member states, but internal borders are often nearly equally or equally relevant. The idea is really to share the policies in a way which would allow the different actors to bring forward principles for success, basically good practices, what has worked to replicate and adjust within their respective environments. On the supply side, I think, as you have mentioned also in your poll, a big concern is actually housing costs, and the housing costs are frequently influenced and strongly influenced by the way we deal with the either construction or renovation of buildings, but also the planning, permitting processes, which take often longer than is strictly necessary to have a meaningful and efficient way of balancing out different interests in society, because that's often the purpose of a procedure, both planning and permitting. Different views have to be brought together. And there have been, I would say, a number of suggestions which could really make a difference. One is the working methods, for instance, through increased digitalization. So have more capacity, more skills in public administrations, but also in the private companies dealing with construction and renovation, simply to have more efficient ways of operating through digitalization, but also through more off-site constructions, modular constructions, which change sometimes the ways of doing things. The idea is we are in a world where there's a shortage of workers, but also a shortage of skills. And therefore, the time needed on each construction or renovation site needs to be reduced. Otherwise, there are always bottlenecks. And of course, labor is also very expensive. So the more we can reduce the time needed on each construction renovation site, the more affordable, the cheaper it becomes to carry out a certain type of work. I think the approach from the Commission side, at least, is to see really three objectives at the same level. So not to basically trade off affordability above all against, for instance, sustainability or quality, decent quality of the buildings, but really to make sure that the quality which we define in the public planning, in the permitting, but also by the project developers, will be achieved in the most efficient and cost-effective manner. Quality includes safety, health, accessibility of buildings, but also social inclusion, how we operate the building system more broadly to integrate vulnerable citizens in society much better than they have been so far. And that is a very important point to change also the ways of how we deal with certain issues in society, to deinstitutionalize, for instance, and move rather to a kind of, I would say, mixed system where we try to avoid ghettos, for instance, or buildings which have particular problems. So this is a very important point to try to see that the objectives of housing policy more broadly, affordability, sustainability, and decency, decent quality, are dealt with at the same level, and that once the quality and sustainability requirements are defined, that they are delivered in the most effective manner. That requires major improvements, and I think some of them are directly built in law, but often it's about the implementation, how to carry out certain procedures and how to run a process in a more inclusive, more efficient manner, not necessarily sequentially, but bringing together through roundtable approaches, for instance, different interest groups right up front, and try to deal with things more quickly. That also relates partly to public procurement. So there are various aspects, how to implement environmental law, energy and climate law, etc. Sometimes the rules at member state level go even beyond what is required at EU level, consciously and sometimes unconsciously. And that, I think, requires also some transparency and working together in finding good practices to implement. Another important aspect is, of course, finance. So funding from public sources, European and national, so revision of the stated rules, but also seeing how we can more effectively deploy the European funds to the recipients, to the beneficiaries of projects, that conditions are clear, that there's a very strong cooperation between the different actors, EU, member states at various levels, but also the financial institutions at European level, the European Investment Bank, the national promotional banks, regional promotional banks, international financial institutions, that we collectively, also with the private sector, develop an understanding how much is needed, how funding can be generated in terms of volumes, but also conditions for financing, that it becomes attractive and I would say reasonably usable for those who need it. And then on the other side, to create more transparency, I would say, in the national context, but also in particular at local and regional level, where the users will need to be enabled to have access in the least complex manner, in the most simple manner, basically, transparent manner. And that, I think, is a challenge, because we have sometimes complaints that it's simply too difficult to understand, and then people sometimes give up or don't even ask for funding. So that is something which would be a challenge which cannot necessarily be solved at EU level, but which we try to work together and see what can be done to explain better, to create access points, including advisory services, in a way which makes it accessible to project developers, local and regional authorities, and those who really need to think about building projects. About the demand side, I talked already briefly. So I would say objective social inclusion for vulnerable groups, homeless people, migrants, of course, handicapped people, senior citizens, but also very much those who actually are at the beginning of their working life, young people, students, trainees, that they will get special attention in terms of having, I would say, tailor-made offers to them, which enable them to study and train and work at places where they're best fit. Essential workers, very important, those who have lower than average salaries, that they actually can have a reasonable, I would say, package. And as you said, Magdalena, housing cannot be necessarily solved in a very limited regional or local, even local context, but has to be optimized in terms of connection with mobility infrastructure, digital infrastructure, trying to expand the solutions beyond the immediate borders of the city, which is under highest pressure, trying to see how we can also integrate better rural areas, but also create meaningful, I would say, offers in rural or less pressured, possibly even declining industrial areas in urban environments, where people would actually otherwise continue living, and more people would leave, because there should be a rebalancing across the territories of the member states, not to create basically now the impression that we just build more and more houses in the highest pressure areas, and then this might actually have the effect that even more people are coming, and then the situation will not improve. So there needs to be a rebalancing, I would say, in a more strategic manner across the broader territories of member states, beyond regions, of course, also cross-border. And I think that is probably the biggest added value which the EU can make, that member states will start a more intensive cooperation. So far, we have a kind of patchy cooperation on housing. It's lagging behind compared to other areas. We will encourage to create a housing alliance, really, to bring member states together, so to discuss these things in also a cross-national borders context, not only cross-internal borders context. There, as I said, it's also necessary, but also cross-national borders, because the assessment has to be done on a substance basis. Yeah, what are the metropolitan areas which have an effect and which require cooperation across borders? There are several in the EU. Luxembourg is one of them, where this would really create mutual benefits, to think more broadly. So that is what we are trying to do, and come out in December together with a construction strategy, but also the European Bauhaus communication and a revision of the state aid guidelines. And in March there will be the anti-poverty strategy. As I said, working together very closely with the Council and with the European Parliament. There will be Council conclusions also in December, and a European Parliament final report, which is already being discussed in March. And then I think we are trying to build this up towards a summit, which will take place next year, to really create a common understanding of what needs to be done. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the further exchange, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I will, if I may, hold on to you for the question and answer session after a short while, when we've heard from Elina. We have a number of questions and a very interesting exchanges in the chat. So do please have a look at those, because I'll bring one or two of those issues back to you in a minute. Let me just note, please, the responses to our second poll, looking at some of the views about what would improve housing in border regions. So let's have a look at this chart. This pie chart will tell us that coordinating spatial planning and urban development policies is accorded the top slot as the best way of improving housing in border regions, but followed closely by improving public transport and cross-border mobility. And indeed, the relationship between spatial planning and transport issues is obviously an extremely important one. Very often the best land use framework is one that utilizes public transport corridors as a basis for allocation of land for housing. Sharing good practices on affordable and social housing secures some responses. Shared data platforms certainly does, but not as much as I might have imagined it would. Harmonizing taxation and property regulations, we can obviously not distinguishing between those two. Both are separately important. Harmonizing property regulations and presumably also potentially building regulations. Okay, let's turn, if I may, please, to, we're very, very pleased to have with us Elina Yli-Luukko. If I have mangled your pronunciation, please forgive me, Elina. Elina is with us, joining us, and is the Executive Director of the Arctic Construction Cluster in Finland, and responsible for the Nordic Tiny Villages project. Elina, border regions in northern Finland and Sweden have specific challenges, including seasonal tourism and mining. Please tell us about what were the needs identified in your border region that led you to develop the Tiny Villages project, and perhaps you could tell us something about that project itself.
Thank you, Andrew, so much. I would like to share my slides also.
Please. We have the slides. There we go.
So I am the Executive Director of Arctic Construction Cluster Finland, and I would like to tell you about our tiny homes project. Next slide, please. Few words about our cluster. So we are a so-called triple helix cluster. We bring together construction industry companies, educational institutes and authorities in northern Finland. We are a meeting platform, and at the moment we have about 170 members, and we organize about 25 events every year. Next slide, please. Could I have all the text from this slide as visible? Just press the enter.
We need to get the whole screen on all that text. Yes, you're right. We haven't got the text there. Oh,
now it's coming. Thank you.
Very good.
So, during our Interreg Aurora's CAPEAC project, we realized that we have very similar problems in northern Finland, northern Sweden, and northern Norway, concerning the lack of high quality affordable housing in some regions. For example, in mining areas, the mining normally stays about 15 years in the same area. So it's not a good idea to build concrete block of flats there. And in Finland, the great problem is that we have in seasonal labor in some tourist areas. And in the tourist season, the prices get very high in rents. And so we came up with the solution that we could bring tiny homes concept to Northern Scandinavia. And in this, we had a pretty small-scale project already in 24. Our partners were Lapland University of Applied Scientists from Rovaniemi, Finland, and then LTU Business from Luleå, Sweden. And this year we had an application for a big Interreg Aurora project. Could I have more text? And it is about 1.4 million euros, and it is now in, and we got some more partners, Luleå Tekniske University and Oulu University and the Arctic University from Norway. So this tiny homes concept could be used in mining areas and in tourist areas, and also now we have invented that it could be very useful in dual use for military services. And we have been having contact with Finnish military forces, and the Norwegians are very interested in using this kind of housing for NATO groups. Could I have the next slide, please? So the idea is these tiny villages are small, wooden, movable houses. They are made out of wood construction. They are normally from 25 to 65 square meters big. And the idea is that the foundation is very light, so it requires only minimal earthworks. It doesn't destroy the nature, and the technical solutions can be partly based on off-grid solutions, and that also is the idea that you didn't have to dig the ground very deep. Next slide, please. This is one solution that we came up with. This is an architectural drawing. And as you can see, this is a little bit bigger house. It's about 65 square meters, and there's plenty of room for 5 people. There's living room, kitchen, bathroom, and 5 beds. And we have been this is only one solution. We have been developing these modular solutions so that you could put these modules beside each other and above each other to make bigger houses, or just then use one module for one person. Next slide, please. Well, this was very shortly what I wanted to tell you about the tiny homes concept. So please, if you have questions, I would like to try to answer them.
Yeah, Elina, thank you very much. You said there are potentially other applications for what you've been developing. You were talking about Finnish military and so on, but have you seen other opportunities to scale up what you're doing or transfer what you're doing to other purposes? Things like student housing come to mind, or Magdalena was talking about refugee housing. Are there such other opportunities in other locations for this?
Well, actually, we had this idea to bring this kind of housing also to Ukraine. And we have this very small housing fair area in the city of Vasilkiv. And the idea was to bring this kind of prototypes, tiny homes prototypes from Finland to Ukraine, and then learn how the Ukrainians how to build this kind of houses from timber, and then establish sister or daughter companies for these Finnish companies in Ukraine.
Right. This is the construction is not on site. Are they brought from off-site, and whereabouts are you doing the construction for the homes?
The houses are prefabricated. We make them as 2D elements, so they are easy to pack and transfer. And then inside we make them as small houses. And after that, we have the solution for the construction that you can lift them up to the truck and then move them to another area.
Right. Can I, Elina, thank you very much indeed. Let's broaden this out. I want to take that last point and perhaps just ask Stefan, if I may, because you referenced modular construction, Stefan. One of the things that I am often told about trying to have off-site construction, it's a great thing potentially, because of course one isn't necessarily so constrained by the difficulty of finding construction workers in some of the difficult labour markets. But the need is for aggregating demand and making demand relatively predictable, so that there can be the necessary substantial investment in factories to produce the off-site construction. Is there is part of the task force looking at how one can aggregate that demand to create what's effectively a more stable market for modular construction?
Indeed, Andrew, I think it's a major point. Our colleagues in DG Grow are looking into this. So in order to really make sure that also the permitting requirements are not so different across even member state, within a member state, but also across member states, so that actually there can be a bigger scaling up effect, kind of a bigger economies of scale can be created, because the worst enemy of scaling up is actually you have different requirements in each and every place, from city to city or region to region, so let alone cross-border. And I think what Elina just mentioned, the advantage of moving around if demand shifts is also a very important consideration. But in particular, I would say for those buildings which cannot be moved around, to have quick reaction time, so and of course much reduced costs in a particular environment. I think what also several participants mentioned, that there can be then also, I would say, relative quick reactions in a cross-border context by creating capacity just beyond the national border without long and complicated planning and permitting, if basically there's a certain harmonization of the requirements. That simply it's a kind of product which can circulate more easily across border and maybe even for a time-limited manner, without having to dedicate land for eternity, but rather for a certain duration. And then we have to reassess in 10 or 20 years whether the need is still there in such a manner or something else can be done. So I think the reactivity is a major advantage also of modular construction.
Right, very interesting. Magdalena, could I just, in the chat, one of the important points made by Ricardo, I think, is that cross-border regions can sometimes be a real opportunity to enable the balancing of supply and demand in housing markets to be better achieved, because one is able to access lower cost areas, some land that perhaps hasn't been used so effectively in the past, maybe previously developed land that's cross a border, but would be able to be developed. Do you think, obviously from the Luxembourg point of view, with a very relatively high-priced, pressured market, do you look across the border and think, actually, we can, if we work collectively, we can balance supply and demand across this broader canvas, as it were, more effectively?
Well, in my opinion, first we have to sit all together at the table and try to talk. I mean, we, the stakeholders from Luxembourg and also from neighboring regions, because up to now we didn't really have this kind of direct discussion about the problems. There is a lot of studies and also press releases related to these pressures on the cross-border housing markets. But I think, yeah, to some extent, this rebalancing perhaps could be possible, but we need to clearly agree on, let's say, the rules of the game, if I may use this kind of language. Because up to now, there is a huge debate on how to also compensate the neighboring regions that are where the cross-border workers are living, and they are paying taxes in Luxembourg. So this is also a kind of huge problem for these neighboring regions, that they are not receiving anything. They have to accommodate the population that is working and paying the taxes in Luxembourg. So we have to also find a way that a kind of win-win strategy for both parties, for all the parties involved in the process. But to help national, local and regional stakeholders in all these discussions, I would like to also take the occasion to say that we were just granted an Interreg Greater Region project on cross-border housing governance. And the project will kick off in January next year. And so for the next 3 years, we will be trying to first establish also the database related to housing and land dynamics in the greater region, and then also to create a kind of platform for the co-creation of cross-border housing governance. So this missing puzzle that I also highlighted earlier in the presentation. So I hope that perhaps maybe in the future I could give you some insights on how the things are going on.
Good. Stefano, could I come back to you, because one of the questions was whether the Housing Task Force will be looking specifically at the issues raised by and also the opportunities offered by cross-border regions as a way of tackling housing market issues. Are you able just to respond? Is that the case? And can I just add a different question? I'm very interested in the issue, because in some places like Luxembourg that Magdalena was talking about, trying to deliver the necessary number of houses per year, new additions to housing, is a pressure. In other places, there isn't necessarily anything like the same level of additional demand for housing, but actually sometimes the housing is in the wrong tenure and just not quite in the right quality. Are you looking at all of those problems together and getting because the tenure that is demanded, do people want to own houses? Do they want to privately rent? Do they want social rent? Are they younger people looking for different kind of properties? The different tenures, of course, dictate the market dynamics to a great extent, don't they?
Indeed, Andrew. I think the answer to your first question is yes, as part of the Housing Alliance, because the idea is really to bring together the various actors, member state actors at different levels and across ministries also, and departments in cities, for instance. Think about environment, mobility, spatial planning, energy, all these aspects. And therefore also in a cross-border context. So definitely yes, but this will be shaped then, I would say, together with the member states. So we, of course, offer support. So I think there's a lot of demand and actually even requests for support also, but of course, always in a careful balance with subsidiarity and proportionality concerns. No one intends, and we do not intend at the European level, no one wants us to take over from member states, but rather support. So what you said is in the second question is also extremely important. I would say the needs, but also the projection of likely evolving needs is very important. Is an area or a specific city, urban environment, but also a rural area growing or declining? In which way? Where are the pressure points? Is it more like, I would say, the competition with tourism, or is it additional demand from, for instance, students if a new university is set up or expanding, or if there's a huge pressure on that? Is there a major issue with integration of vulnerable groups such as migrants, homeless people, people who have who face social exclusion? So, for instance, just as examples, and that I think that assessment needs to be done to be as targeted as possible. And what would be the right solutions for those groups? I think in general terms, one can say that those member states which have a relatively large historical social housing or public housing sector, or operating with housing companies which have limited profit expectations, who basically have a social and affordable housing mindset, and some of them have had that historically, are the more resilient ones, where there are the less problems. So I think the development of basically actors which are responsible in socially responsible, who feel socially responsible, is crucial. And I think through the European financing platform, we try to bring in also investors with a more long-term patient perspective. So to discourage basically behavior which is socially undesirable, in particular short-term profit expectations, some negative effects of speculation, but rather long-term patient capital, which somehow has also a social responsibility dimension. I think that is a very important practice as well. And as mentioned, I think in the broader regional context, what Magdalena said for Luxembourg, which is true for a number of cross-border areas where there's a city, for instance, close to the border, that there's a kind of really bringing around the same table the different actors and see where could be development routes, including along mobility tracks, because of course commuting times are extremely important. Commuting is important, and therefore if there's public transport which is efficient, Luxembourg has set up a free public transport now for its citizens, but this should be developed in the cross-border context, for instance in the case of Luxembourg, so that people would allow to move out much more to avoid losing time every day, because a major cost, the commuting time, if you sit in front of the car in a traffic jam, in the car in the traffic jam, you lose the time. If you can sit on the train and work already on your laptop, it's not lost time. So this is a major dimension to factor in and can ease the pressures in the broader context.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, not only true, but immensely practical points as well. Thank you very much. Can I say a big thank you on behalf of all the participants to our presenters, to Elina, to Magdalena, to Stefan. But can I bring it back to you, Simona, if I may? I think not only in our responses to the polls, in the excellent presentations and in the lively chat discussion, I think there's a great deal that the cross-border regions can bring to the table, not only in understanding how the challenges of the housing market affect them, but actually some of the opportunities that cross-border regions offer. I wonder if you wanted just to respond to the debate for a moment.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Andrew. Indeed, what I noted down is that the most pressing challenges that are there are related to housing are the affordability and the housing prices and the administrative burden related to construction. And we have seen how that the issues of housing, they are particularly pronounced, namely in those border regions with a high proportion of commuters, like the Grandes Régions, like the great regions. And we have also seen that there are pressures not only on housing, clearly, but also on the public services. We've mentioned the public transport, cross-border public services. So we need to have a look at housing in an integrated way. And it clearly came out from the polls that coordinating spatial planning and urban development policies, but also improving these public transport or other and cross-border mobility, this would improve the situation of of housing in border regions. What can be done, as we have heard from our Luxembourgish colleague, is the collection of cross-border data or common spatial planning, statistics, or housing strategies. And it is great to hear from Luxembourg that they recognize the need for cross-border cooperation there, and that there will be this project, cross-border cooperation project on housing governance. I'm very much looking forward to hear what will be the outcomes of that. From the EU perspective, we could hear from our colleague Stefan from the Housing Taskforce how important it is to ensure affordable and inclusive housing for different social groups without actually compromising the quality. We also hear that a more intensive cooperation across borders is needed to tackle housing issues outside of the national boundaries. We have heard about the pilot project supported by the Interreg Aurora program, how Finland, Sweden, and Norway are testing these innovative solutions to housing in the far north. And I think that those are all very valuable insights into how cooperation can make housing more affordable and the housing pressures less demanding in the border regions. So let me thank also from my side to the organizers of today's breakfast debate, to Law Associate as well as to my REGIO colleagues, to the speakers, and also to the audience of today's breakfast for the engaging exchange in the chat. I'd like to inform that we will still hold another edition of the border breakfast debate in this year, which will most likely take place in December. So I invite you to stay tuned for the information on our Futuring platform. Thank you, and over to you, Andrew.
Simona, thank you so much, and we will very much look forward to that. Can I reiterate our thanks not only to our excellent presenters, but also to all of our participants for their participation, not only in the polls, but a fascinating chat discussion. I think it further demonstrates, as we know, that cross-border regions are not only a source of inspiration for European integration, but can bring forward many, many practical ways in which we can tackle these challenges and find ways and solutions to them. But I think we'll probably take away with us, Magdalena, the just one sentence. Yes, well, let's put people around the table. That's a very good starting point, isn't it? So if that's our principal takeaway for achieving this and helping to tackle these challenges, it will be a very valuable one. Thank you all very much indeed today for being with us. Do have a good day. We look forward to the continuing discussion on the Futurium platform and to meeting you again at the next Borders Breakfast Debate.